one of the things that I found that was really interesting is they did a study on Buddhist monks. And Buddhist monks, they found that there was more than average activation in their prefrontal cortex. So are you suggesting that making a sort of lifestyle change, like getting rid of cocaine, or something as simple as getting rid of nicotine, requires not only a simple action but an entire, well, restructuring of your brain?
Well, your brain has to change. You have to bring it back to where you want it to be, and it takes time. I mean, again, it may have something to do with your background and how you're brought up, just like the rats that are in the excited environment or the extended environment compared to rats that are, maybe you have better ability to drive your prefrontal cortex, to activate your prefrontal cortex so you don't become addicted if you have a certain kind of background. Maybe monks have a different kind of background or ability to raise their prefrontal cortex that some other people may not. And so these other people are more likely to relapse back to taking a drug again. Yeah, so that's certainly a possibility.
So that's it. That's an interesting idea. So what do we know? And I know this is outside of your realm of study, so you could say that this is not that you don't know, but what do we know about being able to increase your prefrontal cortex, right? Being able to increase the size of your prefrontal cortex through neuroplasticity measures.
Well, yeah, a lot of this is speculation anyway. I mean, we don't have any hard evidence about how to do anything like that.
Mm,
Um, uh, there are certain things you can do to activate prefrontal cortex. Certain kinds of tasks that are more complex. It's an area of the brain that's associated with higher order cognitive kind of processes, um, and we don't know in addicts whether their prefrontal cortex is low to begin with, because we haven't done an MRI scan of someone who hasn't been addicted yet.
mm,
We don't have that kind of information. We might have the information after they become addicted, but we don't know what their prefrontal cortex was doing before that. And so maybe it was low in the first place and that allowed them to become addicted, or maybe not. We don't know that. We know that if prefrontal cortex, if you can build it up and activate it after addiction, maybe you can prevent relapse.
mm.
But maybe the problem lies somewhere else, and the prefrontal cortex activation is just helping to overcome that other problem. You see
Yeah.
what I'm saying? We
Mhm.
just don't know that, because you don't have the luxury of studying an addict before he becomes addicted. We
Mm.
don't know who's going to become addicted before they're addicted, and so we don't have that kind of background information. That's why rats are useful, because we can control rats. We can look at them before we expose them to drug and look at them after we expose them to drug. But as I said, rats live in a relatively simple environment, or a simple thing. And so, they don't have issues like peer pressure. They don't have issues like, well, I'm watching TV and I see all these ads about alcohol and I want to start taking alcohol, like people do. And so it's a difficult kind of a problem. And that's one of the reasons why addiction is so difficult to study and to treat.
Yeah.
I,
Seems like a
I
lot of the problems are correlational, right? In
yeah,
human, everything's correlational. I thought one of the things that was really interesting is in one of your studies, you found that stress actually decreases the prefrontal cortex in prefrontal cortex activity in rats, and I think that's super interesting because when we think about relapse, a lot of the relapse actually comes from stress.
exactly. Yeah. Stress is one of the factors that drives relapse, just like cues can drive relapse.
Hmm.
Cues associated with the drug. Stress is another thing that can drive relapse. And stress is also manifest in prefrontal cortex. So stress has an effect on the development or the eventual structural aspect of neurons in prefrontal cortex. Stress can alter synaptic connections in prefrontal cortex. Stress can alter the extent of dendritic connections
Hmm.
between neurons in prefrontal cortex. So stress is another big factor. And then that opens up a whole nother problem because there's all different kinds of stress.
Yeah.
You know, for some people, certain things can be stressful, and other people, those same things may not be stressful.
Hmm.
Um, so again, it's really hard to narrow and make a definitive statement about it. You can look at it in rats, and you can stress rats in various ways. You can put them in a chamber where where they can't move for a couple of hours, so they're sort of locked up.
Hmm.
That's a stressful situation for a rat. You can shock them. That's another stressful situation for a rat. But what's the equivalent in humans? You know,
Yeah.
it's difficult to know. So we may be able to prevent addiction in rats, but we're a long way from preventing addiction in people because it's a complicated process. And the other thing too that you have to keep in mind is that a lot of the work being done in addiction is funded through the government. You don't have a lot of private companies trying to study addiction
Hmm.
because there's no real financial incentive for them to study.
Oh.
I mean, what kind of financial incentive do you have? I mean, you know, most addicts aren't very rich. I mean, they're not going to be wanting to take a $100 pill to get rid of their addiction. They'll rather just take the drug or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so you don't have a lot of research being devoted to addiction except what's provided by the government. Different from what we have for a lot of drugs for depression or schizophrenia or other kinds of diseases, or even a vaccine for a virus. There's a lot of financial incentives to develop that kind of stuff, but you don't have it for addiction. And so that's one of the reasons addiction research kind of lags behind other things.
That's kind of annoying. I also find that it's a somewhat taboo topic. You know, when you sit there and you talk about addiction, it's like, well, an addict doesn't like to talk about their own addiction, right? Like, you know, if you talk to someone about their cocaine addiction, they're gonna be like, stop talking to me. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. It's bothering me. So it seems like there's also a problem facilitating conversation in that area too.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems associated with it.
Wow. Yeah. I mean,
So you know, I don't think we're going to be very close to solving the addiction problem, um, but every little step helps. So we know more now than we did 20 years ago. We know a little bit more now about how individual drugs work, and so eventually, I think we'll get there. But it's going to take a long time. It's not going to be something that's going to be solved overnight.